Another day, another story. Invading a country like China would be a monumental and highly unlikely undertaking for the United States due to a multitude of reasons, including military, economic, political, and ethical considerations. Here's an overview of why such an invasion is not feasible or advisable. Welcome to Tabo Eminent Channel. 1. Military challenges. China's military power. China has one of the largest and most advanced militaries in the world, with over 2 million active personnel and cutting-edge technologies, including nuclear weapons. Geography. China's vast territory, mountainous terrain, and highly urbanized areas make invasion logistically complex. Defense capabilities. China has sophisticated missile systems, cyber warfare capabilities, and a strong navy and air force that could repel or severely hinder any invasion attempt. Mutually assured destruction, MAD. Both the US and China are nuclear powers. Any large-scale conflict risks escalating to a nuclear exchange, which would have catastrophic global consequences. 2. Economic interdependence. Global trade impact. The US and China are deeply interconnected economically. China is a major trading partner for the US, and any conflict would severely disrupt global supply chains, harming both economies. Economic retaliation. China could respond with significant economic countermeasures, including halting trade, selling off US debt, or disrupting manufacturing for American companies that rely on Chinese production. 3. Political and diplomatic factors. Global opposition. An unprovoked invasion would likely be condemned by most of the international community, including key US allies. This could lead to isolation and damage to America's global standing. Uncharter. An invasion without a legitimate cause would violate international law, including the UN Charter, which prohibits aggressive war. Repercussions on alliances. US allies, particularly in Asia, might distance themselves to avoid being drawn into a catastrophic conflict. 4. Ethical and humanitarian concerns. Civilian impact. A war with China would result in massive civilian casualties and a humanitarian crisis on an unprecedented scale. Global stability. A conflict between two major powers could destabilize the entire world, leading to widespread suffering and displacement. 5. The lack of justification. No casus belli. There is no clear or justifiable reason for the US to invade China. Diplomatic and economic competition does not warrant military aggression. Alternative strategies. The US pursues other means of addressing issues with China, including diplomacy, trade negotiations, and alliances in the Indo-Pacific region. Certainly. Let's delve deeper into a scenario-based narrative explaining why a US invasion of China would be unrealistic and how global events might unfold if tensions escalated. Here's a hypothetical storyline that illustrates the complexities. Prelude. Rising tensions over several years. Tensions between the US and China reach an all-time high. Disputes over trade, Taiwan's sovereignty, and territorial claims in the South China Sea escalate into military posturing. Naval forces from both nations engage in frequent standoffs, and cyber attacks attributed to each side disrupt critical infrastructure. Despite the hostility, backdoor diplomacy continues. Both nations recognize that a full-scale war could devastate the global economy and lead to unprecedented loss of life. Scenario. The conflict reaches a flashpoint when an accident occurs. A US surveillance drone crashes into a Chinese fighter jet over disputed waters. Media on both sides fan nationalist fervor, and public opinion demands action. However, both governments tread carefully, issuing strong rhetoric but avoiding immediate retaliation. In this climate of distrust, smaller regional players, nations like Taiwan, Japan, and the Philippines, brace for the fallout. They urge the US and China to de-escalate while quietly increasing their own military readiness. The decision faced with public and political pressure, US military advisors outline the catastrophic challenges of any military engagement. Operational risks. A direct invasion would require mobilizing millions of troops, securing supply lines across the Pacific, and neutralizing China's advanced defense systems. Nuclear brinkmanship. Both sides have vast nuclear arsenals. Even a limited exchange could trigger global devastation. Instead, the U.S. opts for an enhanced containment strategy. Sanctions blitz. Massive economic sanctions are imposed on China, targeting key industries and financial systems. Alliance building. The U.S. strengthens its alliances with India, Japan, South Korea, and Australia, creating a united front to counterbalance China's influence. Cyber and space warfare. Both sides engage in covert operations, targeting satellites, communications, and critical infrastructure. China's response. China retaliates by seizing Taiwan. Using the crisis as a pretext, China launches an invasion of Taiwan, gambling that the U.S. and its allies won't risk an all-out war to defend the island. Economic weaponization. Beijing halts exports of rare earth minerals crucial for global tech industries, crippling supply chains. Regional pressure. Chinese forces conduct aggressive maneuvers near U.S. bases in Guam and Japan, testing the resolve of American allies. Global fallout. The standoff reshapes global dynamics. Economic collapse. Stock markets crash as global trade grinds to a halt. Millions lose jobs, and inflation soars worldwide. Humanitarian crisis. Taiwan becomes a war zone, displacing millions and creating a refugee crisis in neighboring countries. New alliances. Russia and Iran align more closely with China, forming a bloc to counter NATO influence. Meanwhile, Europe is torn between supporting the U.S. and maintaining trade with China. The gathering storm setting. Late 2030s tensions between the U.S. and China have simmered for decades. What begins as an isolated cyber attack on a major U.S. financial institution, blamed on Chinese operatives, escalates into an international crisis. The attack cripples Wall Street for 48 hours, wiping trillions of dollars from the economy. The U.S. government responds with retaliatory cyber strikes, targeting Chinese military networks. The breaking point. A devastating missile strike hits a U.S. military base in Guam, killing hundreds. China denies involvement, but the U.S. presents evidence, later revealed to be doctored, of Chinese complicity. War is declared. A world in chaos. The war spreads beyond the Pacific. Proxy battles erupt in Africa and South America as nations are forced to choose sides. Russia supplies arms to China, while NATO bolsters U.S. forces. Economic fallout. Global trade collapses. Food and medicine shortages spark riots in major cities. Millions lose their jobs as factories shut down due to lack of raw materials. In Silicon Valley, tech companies race to develop artificial intelligence systems to counter China's cyber dominance, creating fears of an uncontrollable AI arms race. Resolution. Diplomacy or destruction. Realizing the unthinkable cost of continued escalation, the international community intervenes. The United Nations, ASEAN, and the EU broker emergency talks. Both sides agree to a tense ceasefire, but the scars remain. The US and China emerge from the crisis weakened but committed to avoiding direct conflict. A new Cold War begins, marked by proxy wars, technological races, and a fragile peace. Conclusion. An invasion of China would be an unfathomable geopolitical gamble with devastating consequences for the US, China, and the world. The focus of both nations remains on managing competition and preventing conflict rather than escalating to open warfare. Thanks for watching. Request you to subscribe the channel.